My sisters and brothers, the Lord be with you. Reading from the Good News of Jesus Christ according to St. Matthew. Jesus said to his apostles, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. Whoever receives you receives me, and whoever receives me receives the one who sent me. Whoever receives a prophet because he or she is a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever receives a righteous person because he is a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. And whoever gives only a cup of water to one of these little ones to drink because the little one is a disciple, amen, I say to you, he will surely not lose his reward." The good news of our salvation.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So, my friends, I don't know if you noticed anything different or unusual. These people here are trying to mess me up. Usually, John does the first reading and Patrick does the second. What happened? I mean, you kind of stepped out of what I'm used to, so I'm kind of discombobulated now in terms of I can't deal with all these changes that you people are coming up with, right? And really, dealing with changes is a principle in science that we call homeostasis. And that means, on some level, everybody's committed to keep things exactly the way they are, right? It's a principle of science. So, now, everybody wants change until it affects them, then they don't want it anymore, you see? So I want you next week to do the first reading, and Patrick go back to the second reading. I cannot deal with all of this, all right? Now, we were discussing birthdays and stuff before the Mass, and I did not want to admit this, but I am a boomer. I'm a baby boomer. We have all the generations here. I won't even ask what you all are, but I am a boomer, but I want you to know I have been freed. I am free at last. I am no longer a boomer. I am now a Zoomer, right? Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Zooming, and this is what I do most of the day now. I Zoom from morning until night. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but nevertheless, the Zooming, for those of you not familiar, is a meeting platform that's really become rather popular. So now I am officially a Zoomer. Now, when we started all this Zooming stuff, it was around March or so, just as the university was locking down, my class went online and we went into Zoom, right? And I was liking it. But at that point, Zoom did not have the proper security measures in place. And so this was a common theme for a couple of weeks. So into my class comes this guy, whoever he was. All of a sudden he appears and he has this terrible, I'm not going to say what it was, explicit sexual scene, cartoon kind of thing going on the computer screen. Well, needless to say, I'm having a nervous breakdown over this because I couldn't figure out how to get this thing off. And it took about 3 minutes to figure this out. 3 minutes that seemed like an eternity. Well, quite frankly, the thing that was most humbling, if you will, is when the students wrote their course evaluations at the end of the semester, there were several who wrote, "That was the best part of the whole course," if you can imagine such a thing. This is what I put up with, right? But this whole notion of zooming, we're wired. Now, I'd like to think, well, no, kind of like right now. Is this on Zoom, by the way? Yeah, we're some other platform. So we're wired right now, right? So right now, in this moment, we are wired for God, right? Now, the problem is that we're wired for all kinds of things. So we're wired for God, we're wired for our work, we're wired for where I need to go later, we're wired for, what I want to eat for dinner, we're wired for money, whatever the case might be. We have wires all over the place, right? And I think that one of the things that during this pandemic, it gives us all a chance to step back and pause and ask myself the question, what am I wired for? Am I really wired for God? What are my priorities? Now, how is it that I spend my days? How is it that I use my time? And so really, what Matthew was saying, as I mentioned, leave father and mother, leave your old way of thinking, all right? Reconsider the ways in which you're wired, right? And I would mention just two very simple things that we might want to think about. And the first is this: we are wired to be with one another. See, this business of being isolated from each other is not a very good thing. So I find myself, by the way, you get a little lightheaded after a while. And you get used to, you don't have the socialization. We're wired, whether you like it or not, we're wired to be with one another. See? And so many people have said, oh, I miss going to church. I miss Eucharist and so on. And I've listened to this long and hard. And what they're really saying, we miss being together. We as the body of Christ. They miss receiving the Eucharist, but we miss being the body of Christ. We miss being together, you see? And so we're wired for God, but we're also wired to be with each other. And during this time of the pandemic, we've had to spend time in our homes, those of you who have children, so you're there 24/7. And it kind of gives us, take pause, how have I been living my life? And how might I get rewired? And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is how do we get rewired? Now, in the gospel, Jesus tells us that we should have hospitality. He says we should give drink to the thirsty, food to the hungry, etc. So and we should, that's a good thing. But I'd like to look at hospitality, the ways in which we welcome each other, the ways in which we invite the other to come here and to be with us. And so, therefore, we're wired for God and we're wired for this human interaction. And I would leave you with something that I think about very often. A year or two ago, this is kind of useless information, I was leaving Newark Airport and a snowstorm was coming right after I left. So I missed the snowstorm and I was going to Mobile, Alabama, and they had a tornado 1 hour before I got there. So I travel between snowstorms and tornadoes. That's what I do. So I get to Mobile, and there was a lot of destruction as a result of this tornado. So they took me to a place where the homeless were already living, and now they have more homeless of people who lost their homes. And I met this guy there, and I think about this very often. He was a very successful businessman who lost everything. And I said to him, what is it that is the hardest about being homeless? And what he said to me, the hardest thing is that no one ever looks at me. No one ever looks at me, right? And so we're wired for God. We're wired for one another. Let's pay attention. Let's look at one another. And looking at one another, we bring healing, new life,